Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics. I'm the host, Chris Egger, and I'm joined today by Mieko Hester-Perez. Hi, Mieko.
Hi.
And we're going to be talking a lot about Mieko's work. I should start by saying that she has been one of the strongest voices in the cannabis industry for the medical side of all of what we've been talking about in terms of legalization, in terms of patient access, and how that has come together. So the reason we had her on here today, because we feel like here at Cannabis Capital, we need to get back to our roots a little bit. So we wanted to talk to her today about the work she's doing. She is a dedicated advocate for the autism community. She has a personal story to tell about that, and that's where we're going to start our interview today. And then we're going to get into some of her work today as a patient advocate and as somebody who's been out there, in the trenches, so to speak, getting people access to alternative medicine therapies that are just changing lives. So Mieko, welcome. And would you do me a favor, and let's start, because Hope Grown is a place that kind of meets both your personality and also where you communicate with the world. So hopegrown.org is a site that you created to give information, but tell us how this all started for you and your story of getting into cannabis, would you?
Sure. My son was one of the first children, and we were one of the first families to go public in 2009 on Good Morning America, with some information that I stumbled upon. I'm a legal secretary. My son just ended up being one of my biggest cases, and I found some information that supported cannabis as a viable treatment option for families who had exhausted all other treatment options for children on the spectrum. And what a wonderful journey that I was on. Early on in 2009 is when I think the industry started to really just take shape. And I was very fortunate to be among some of the greats in this industry that we cannot forget. The advocates that really, I want to say cultivators,
Yeah.
the cultivators who intervened and gave me and gave Joey life. I still talk about them today. And that's the DNA genetics, that's Kyle Cushman, that's Jorge Cervantes. These are the gentlemen who came and said, you know what, Mieko, we're going to take care of you and Joey. And that's what they did. And so, coming from the legal background that I was from, this was quite the crash course for me. I've lived in a very conservative part of Orange County my entire life, and cannabis was the most obvious.
Call it a taboo, right? It was a taboo for a lot of people.
For me, I come from an extremely conservative family, very religious. And so when I decided to do this, I knew that I needed to show up prepared. And that means my attorney, that means research, that means, because there's no other reason why I would be here.
Right.
I'm not a consumer, so I had to, I needed to plead my case to his medical team, and I was extremely successful and probably would not have been here without them.
Right.
And so later on, Joey was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And, it was one of those days where I really had to look at my son and go, oh my God, do I have the golden child? He has two misunderstood diagnoses. But the one common denominator that ended up being the savior was cannabis. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a muscular diagnosis, and cannabis is a neuromuscle protector. So in 2009, I was knocking out two birds with one stone. And I honestly and very strongly believe that cannabis is what extended his life.
Right.
And he passed away in 2018. And
I got to ask you, and that's an emotional thing. And I want to just say, you know, that you have made Joey so proud. I've known you for a minute now, and I say that to you personally, but, you know, to have a mom who really made his life as comfortable as possible. So just please know that we miss Joey too with you, right? And the work that you do is so important, because I know that this story led you to a voice, right? And Joey was an inspiration for you to get out there and actually become part of the political movement to, you know, bring understanding to the use of these alternative medicines. You've told me is what you call them, alternative medicines project. And you got into the political process during this period of time. You must have really been on a mission, because he was still alive when you did that, right? Am I right in saying that? That when you started making it, access was a huge part of how I came across knowing you back in 2015, 2016.
Yeah, it's been, you know, coming out of legal compliant, which I you know, knew very well, and having again this crash course with this phenomenal group of men that I was working with. um, you know, it all I wanted to do was just to um, be able to just see my son smile. And so I received so much more. And then I just completely committed my life to paying it forward, but paying it forward in a manner in which I wanted to make sure that this particular treatment option was available for other families that look like that. And so, you know, we've made huge strides in this space already, but we still have a few things that we need to tighten up to be able to support these families. And I think that's what I do. Um, Sitting on multiple boards that I sit on, you know, as well as consulting to this day. I still consult for families, you know, all over the world.
Right. And that's something that, you know, I wanted to touch base with you, because this show is pop politics, right? You know, the political climate, that's kind of, so in 2009, right, we're functioning under essentially Prop 215. It was a very confused level. And I know for a lot of families, a lot of parents, especially who have children who have benefited, even you and I can remember Dr. Thomas Minahan from Loma Linda, right? And his daughter Mallory had epilepsy and issues with epilepsy that CBD, you know, created radical treatments for. What is in your mindset right now? Would someone need to hear about the current state of access to medicinal cannabis treatments and how progress is being made of that? I know you do a lot of work in Puerto Rico. I know you do a lot of work here in California, and like you said, globally, you've been to Israel. So give us, you know, your perspective. You know, when in 2016 we passed AUMA, has it benefited? Has it changed? Tell us about your work there. And by the way, I'm going to step off camera for a second, but I'm not leaving the room. 1 second.
Okay.
I just needed to check something. There was a little bit of background noise there.
Yeah. Well, you know, a lot has changed for the better. I see a lot more families who are looking towards this treatment option. But I'm seeing a lack of support with guidance. Guidance is very huge, because the dynamics in our home can only the next family would know what we actually go through in our homes. And so, you know, I believe that even here in California, Prop 64 was great. I believe that, you know, we have a couple of addendums that need to be put in place to support these families. Right. And so that's to date. And I do still think that, you know, I attend family law court quite often, 3 to 5 days out of the week. I'm speaking with social workers all over the country. And it's not that we aren't providing them with a solid structure, but we haven't placed or put in place a guidance piece for these special needs families. You know, till this day, we are still looking at this being a privileged option. And so what I tend to stand behind is be sure and get the right guidance from the right advocate. All advocates aren't the same. Right. You know, and so I always tell families when they come to me, the product is the easiest part. Finding a product, piece of cake, but helping these families navigate is only a veteran can come in and say, this is how you do this, and this is how, and so we need to
dosage and stuff. So that's a good question, because
not even dosage. There's more to us than dosing, because we are dealing with symptoms, not medical symptoms. And I say that we're dealing with behavior issues. Medication is great, but we need a team of assistants to be able to support these families. And so typically when they come to me, and sometimes, I have to tell them, you're not ready for cannabis yet, or you're ready, and this is the most appropriate starting point. So they do catch on very quickly that I'm not the advocate that they met somewhere else. I'm the advocate. My whole goal is for them not to call me or have a social worker contact me. Yeah. So I tend to walk these families, and people say, how do you do this? Well, I had a son diagnosed with autism. I can probably run the whole country in my slippers. I mean, when I speak to other parents and they're driving and they're doing, and it's so refreshing, because it just reinvigorates my spirit. Like, yes, I can do 30 things today. And, I attribute that to Joey. To Joey. He made it possible, because, typically when people come to me now, I always laugh and say I'm a jack of all trades. And they go, yeah, we all are. We all are, because most autism families, when you call them on the phone, or we're doing 10 million things.
And that time crunch, and that's one of the things I wanted to, because and I know the intersection of politics with this story. This is a human story, right? And you're talking about humans just being, right? They're just trying to get through and bring life. But you've worked a lot with the, like, what you would call the tradition. We talk about alternative medicine therapies, which cannabis and CBD kind of fit into that in the vernacular of a medical community. But you work with a lot of doctors and universities, right? And so where are we culturally now in that realm? And is there anything that is hampering their ability here in California, at least? You've talked to me about in the past some of the things that you are not allowed to do as an industry professional, as a doctor, and where are we now in terms of the acceptance of that? And is there anything hindering it right now that could change?
I see less hindrance. I'm starting to see I'm starting to see doctors who are so happy to be able to meet the cannabis industry in the middle, because I think we've done, as an industry, we've done a very good job of laying down the groundwork. I tend to say I'm the bridge between two misunderstood communities, but now I'm starting to see the medical community step up to the plate and want to be involved. When you hear that a University of Irvine has a study of cannabis program, when you hear the Maryland has a curriculum, and when you start noticing that we are making a difference as an industry. And I know the politics with me is I do represent 1 out of 17 homes in America, and we're a pretty impressive voting bloc. And we want to be able to support the cannabis community in providing guidance to us. And we want to not just have a product. We want to be able to support, have the support go back and forth. And so that's really one of my jobs right now is I did create something called the Joey Guidance Amendment. And hopefully soon you'll be able to see it in some piece of legislation coming very soon. Very, very soon.
Would you do me a favor and just, all right, so clearly, so I want you to give me the name of it, and I want you to tell me what inspired you and how that's working. So
what inspired me was my time. Like I wake up on borrowed time, and I said, how do we support the How do we support these families in a way in which they understand? You know, I've had families to take, you know, their children to dispensaries. There's no real guidance or handbook that's available. And so I'm working with some legislators right now to put in a guidance piece for these families, so we can let social workers do their work.
Right.
You know, please address the families that are, yeah. And I call it the Joey's Guidance provision, or Joey's Guidance Act. We haven't agreed on what it'll be, but it will be an amendment to fully support these special needs families, because the cannabis industry took me in, and they took me in, they took care of me. I will never forget it. But now it's my job, or our job as a whole, to come in and provide some solid support, and to say, you don't have to fit a certain class to use cannabis for your child on the spectrum. And so right now, you know, I continue to intervene in some CPS cases, and to really provide some documented report, either from physicians or universities. And that's really what I do, you know, and I love the interaction that I have with these universities, as well as organizations that provide me with the materials to support these families.
And what we're talking about too is that these treatments can help children as well as adults, right, become more productive and more capable to manage their interaction with the world around them. Because we know that genius lives in autism, right?
Yeah.
It's, right, time and time again. And I think we've talked about this. I know that there's people who play sports, right? There's even, I've heard maybe that there's like, you know, people in NASCAR who are like high performing drivers. And I don't know, you know, if they have issues in NASCAR with me saying that. You know, it's kind of like, you know, the Bible Belt heartland of America type, like we talk about conservative, but I mean, that's true, right? I mean, it's really helping people be high functioning, right? Who have,
it's, you know, oddly enough, you know, NASCAR announced a couple of months ago that they're going to start receiving CBD sponsorships, which I thought was phenomenal. I just, you know, I hope they get it right. I hope they get it right.
Well, I do too,
because
that's a huge platform to a global audience.
Yeah, it's a huge platform, but it also shows you the state of our country. Our entire country is for CBD and cannabis therapies. I mean, it's extremely obvious, you know, through every bill that goes through every state. But now that we have it here, we have to do right by these families, and we have to provide them with guidance so they are successful moving forward. I don't want to be one of a handful of families who has been successful because I had access. Everyone should have access, and everyone should be able to have the same educational curve as I did. So, you know, so I've been speaking with quite a few educational programs, and that's really going to help politics.
And I agree, because, you know, I always remind people legalization occurred because of doctors, because of at the time, mainly anecdotal evidence that it was helping people survive the use of chemotherapy, right? That it was, you know, in the AIDS crisis especially, people were dying because their bodies couldn't survive the treatment and eating properly, and so the munchies, right? But it was anecdotal, you know what I mean?
Joey, when he was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, I entered terminal illness, and I started speaking with terminal illness medical directors, and they said, wait a minute, you're just like us. I said, yes, I am. And then I started working and with cancer, with oncologists, so now, and then it's one of the reasons why I always laugh and said, really, autism brought me here. Cannabis is, you know, the vessel who led me to my purpose. But when I entered that space, I realized the same format that I have with my children on the spectrum, I now have that for patients with cancer and terminal illness. And so that's how I kind of entered both. I just started with one of the hardest diagnoses in the world that is still misunderstood. So guess what? Everything else after that is a piece of cake.
Right, right. And so,
Cancer isn't what it used to be thanks to cannabis. And I tell patients, I have patients who come to me and say, you know what, Mieko, I'm scared and I don't want to try cannabis and I don't want to, and my reply to them is cancer isn't what it used to be when you include cannabis.
and by the way, I always say it, I champion it all the time. It's a holistic wellness product for many people, right? It's a functioning product, but there is no doubt that it has changed lives, right? And it has changed outcomes, right? For people who are dealing with severe illnesses. And I know that the Rick Simpson oil movement, that was a refining technique, and he gets credited, the RSO oils, right? But, tinctures. And I always say to people politically, we forget our roots, the core roots of legalization is in this dialogue. I know you're not even a cannabis consumer, right? You personally are not. However, you are one of the major advocates because of what we're talking about here. And you're so personally connected to it, right? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Hopegrown and what you're doing a little bit. So you that's a resource for anybody out there. Hopegrown.org, O-R-G, not .com, it's .org, is a place where your voice really became what we're talking about here. It's affected a lot of people and it's pushed, a lot. So tell us a little bit about how you got into that and what you cover there.
Well, Hopegrown was one of my first supporters. I was working with 2 editors from there. And during COVID, I said, I know that we're not out mingling, we're not out going to conferences. How can I still remain kind of in the know, or how can I bring these medical perspectives into play? And so I called the editor of Hopegrown and I said, I want to do a blog. I'm not a writer. I'm not a journalist. I'm just an autism mom that loves bringing the health conversation into play. And I think it's very, very important that it remains here because that's how we all got here. Mm-hmm. And I felt like, when I entered the industry, I was in my 30s. No longer in my 30s. And I felt like I'm so comfortable in the place that I'm in right now that, and I wanted to give back to the people who gave to me, So I said, I've been here for 13 years. I don't have to pick up the phone and, and say, hi, I'm Mieko. No, I want to interview and do blogs on the people who helped me. And help Joey, helped us.
And by the way, it's national. You have a national voice with this platform. You're seeing a significant amount of traffic. So my question to you is, and I only have a few more minutes with you because I know you said that you're going to spend a half hour with me.
I have to pick up my son and then save the world,
Say that Mieko, that the federal legislation that's coming up, so they're going to be reviewing a national kind of cannabis policy, right? And are there any things that you hope that the federal government considers as far as medicinal access goes? I think adult use will be part of the dialogue there, and that seems to be like this all-consuming topic with everyone. But will you be a voice in trying to advocate for certain policy recognitions there? And I know research is a big part of their considerations there.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot behind the scenes these days. One of them is policy, and one of them is sitting down with regulators. One of them is sitting down with universities and sitting down with medical directors and being really kind of a patient advocate on steroids, because I feel like, I understand the protocol when we're doing putting legislation together, but then there's some things that we can't lose sight of. And so I would imagine and hope that the same agencies that are working with these families incorporate some type of division to be able to really support us. And I think until further federal laws are passed, families are, have to do things with discretion. And once that it's been lifted, then we can flourish, the way that we want to, be able, because today, there's still some families who can't tell certain agencies, that they use CBD or, cannabis in states that provide the rec. I just hope that they do take the input of folks like myself and those who will be able to specifically tell them things that will build a stronger community with the autism community and the cannabis community.
Right, and we recently had interviewed a guest, Brian Buckley, who was he's a Marine Corps veteran, and he's very active. And PTSD is another, a treatment area. And like you're saying, the Veterans Administration for people and their benefits, they historically had issue. It has moved now. If there is a medicinal regulated marketplace in your state, you're not going to jeopardize your benefits. But that took years of a political fight to actually get that, that access allowable. There's just so much promise and so much future here. Yeah. So I just want to remind everyone, it's hopegrown.org is where you can find Mieko speaking to people in the industry, speaking to topics that you'll find of interest. I just want to say thank you so much for all your advocacy work, right? And I know that your voice needs to be heard, right? The political dialogue, we just recently had a roundtable last week. So as you kind of beg out of this, I'm gonna jump into some of the topics that were covered there and what's happening right now. But the idea that having you on today was really to get back to the roots, right? As we talk about adult use, as we talk about all of the various potentials for businesses and stuff, it really does come down to Joey, right? And it comes down to people like Joey, and you're their voice. And somehow or another, through the hard work that you said, you're that person, right? You become a voice for 1 in 17 households in the United States. That's amazing to even think that it's that dramatic of a fix, right? That you can provide people.
Over 60% of these families are looking to cannabis.
Amen. Well, I hope, and if there's ever an issue that's coming up, and when Joey's guidance, is that what it's called? The amendment that you're looking to get into the code and the regulations that medicinal, because I know that there's state regulated boards, and that when you're a doctor, right, and when you're a social worker, you're beholden to certain bureaucratic protocols. And if that's one change that we can be supportive of you, when the time is right, we'd love to get you back on the program to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Chris.
We are
off I go.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. 29. God bless. Thank you so much. You can sign off, and I'm going to stick around.
Got it.
Bye. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. Well, that was a great opportunity to get an insight into something that I think. So last week, Cannabis Capitol was proud to host what was probably the greatest lineup of folks who have actually passed legislation to sit and talk about the current state of affairs. The panel consisted of Adam Hijazi of the Long Beach Collective Association, Virgil Grant, who is a co-founder of the California Minority Alliance and was a proponent for Measure M in the city of Los Angeles, passed that. And then Sean Kiernan, who worked really hard on SB 34, which is the compassionate giving side of that, but has been an advocate for veterans issues and cannabis for quite some time. And we talked a lot about it, and that was the one thing. Mieko was a voice that I think kind of resonates and goes back to the idea that we do need to remember that cannabis is a medicinal product. And some of the things that we talked about last week, the high taxes, number one, and number two, access to regulated product and to stores throughout the state and to many communities where there aren't any. These are two key issues that I think affect a medicinal consumer much more so in many ways. As Mieko pointed out, there's a stigma associated with it still that's changing dramatically. And people like Mieko are a voice in the cannabis culture as well. And so it was really nice to have her on. But last week's panel really brought home a few lessons for us around here, which is that there is common ground in the cannabis industry amongst diverse personalities and business leaders and interests. That common ground really needs to be reestablished. In 2016, with the passage of the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, it really felt like there was a lot of optimism that the future would be bright ahead and that regulation would be something that would lead to a more efficient, a more robust and a healthier cannabis industry. And unfortunately, as all things go, there's some things that just didn't, materialize as the best policies forward. And as we take a look at the future, the legislative climate is different than the citizen initiative process, right? And that's what I think was a lot of people were talking about last week. And so it makes me happy to hear that Mieko has access to the legislative ear, so to speak, that people are willing to still put some important, a lens of scrutiny on how we can change for the better the regulatory climate here. I'm in California and we're looking at that. The federal legalization that's being discussed next year will be a second level for this conversation, because whether or not they get it right, it depends on how many people will be able to access a product that's changing lives. And more importantly, have an adult choice in their life that can, release them from opioid addiction and use, that can, transition them from, preferring alcohol or other, more debilitating type of adult use products that are out there. That, for me, that panel was like, it was almost like a fuse was lit, so to speak. I mean, people were talking a lot about this heavy weight of taxation that's been put upon the industry, and it's actually helping destroy the nascent regulated industry while also encouraging and emboldening an illicit market. Because number one, it's a plant that grows, there's still that transition that needs to happen. And a lot of those people who might enter the regulated market in a less complicated system and at a lower tax rate, and supporting those who are already in the industry by allowing them to price point compete with what is an illicit market, because basically the layers of taxes. So I wanted people to know that we will be having more guests and continue to explore those issues. This is Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics. I am the sounding board, and I may point some directions. I try to keep my own personal opinions out of the dialogues we create here. I do have a history in the municipal political layers here in Southern California, and working on ballot initiatives that were passed in 2016 and 2018 and even in 2014 on a lesser level. But I always like to have people on who are guests who have that common ground in mind. How can we take the diverse opinions of leaders in this cannabis industry and put them on the same deck, so we can actually get something accomplished? That's the difference between 2015 and the Adult Use of Marijuana Act and 2021, in my eyes, is that we need to continue to come together and continue to define how we can best address creating a healthy, productive, free market driven, entrepreneurial driven, American dream driven business and industry to support what is really truly a holistic wellness, as much as it is an alternative medicine therapy for many people. And I mentioned, we've had folks who have talked to the issues of PTSD and opioid addiction and depression and suicide in talking about veterans. We just had Mieko on, who was talking about autism, and there's other leaders who really, there's other issues out there, and there are other category groups, as Mieko pointed to. So I wanted you to know that here at Pop Politics, we take it seriously, that we will be continuing to bring the best guests that we possibly can, who are out there in the world doing things, leading our industry forward, and trying to find that common ground amongst us, so that we as an industry have an opportunity to flourish into the future, because we know that the future is bright ahead. And so with that being said, I want to thank you for tuning in to another edition of Cannabis Capitol's Pop Politics. I want to say that we'll be back next week with a new guest, and I'll be looking forward to it. Until then, thank you so much, and catch up soon. Amen.